This is a tutorial on how to take a bottle that you have in the physical world, translate it into the digital world, Illustrator, Photoshop, so that you can create a rendering and a relatively accurate die line. So the first thing I'll do before we get into the digital space, I have my bottle here. I'm going to just take a top-down image on my phone, like so. That'll be my reference photo. And then I'm just going to take you can take a few dimensions, depending on how accurate I'm trying to be. I might take many dimensions, but for this exercise, all I'm going to do is take the widest dimension, and I'm going to use that as my reference. So I'm going to use calipers, and I'm going to just measure the widest point of the base. And let's see, about 96.06. And I'm just going to note that down. Maybe draw a little schematic, doesn't have to be perfect, so that I know that it was this bottom dimension. And I do like to work in millimeters. I know in the States we use inches, but I find that it's just much easier to work with millimeters because they're nice round numbers. Okay, now we'll go into Illustrator and get these contours going. So now what I've done is I've taken the photo that I took of my bottle and I've opened it in Illustrator. I renamed the file. You can also just place it into an Illustrator file. Either way, what we have here is a picture of our bottle on our artboard and on a single layer. So we're going to do our work above this layer. We want to lock this layer, but first I like to make the opacity down. It's just somewhere in the middle so that it's a little easier to see my black line work on top of it. And then I'm going to go ahead and lock that layer, add a new layer, and then I'm going to set my stroke to just black. It doesn't really matter. I am just in it for the paths today. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our path tool, the pen tool, to outline these contours. And the end goal is not to do a rendering in Illustrator, but rather to do one in Photoshop. So what we're looking for are the paths that are going to be the most useful for us in our Photoshop rendering that we're about to produce. Okay, so let's get started. So you can either select the pen tool from over here on your tools panel. I prefer to just use the hotkey P on my keyboard. And I'm only going to do the left half of the bottle because then I'll reflect it and I can ensure symmetry. One of the things to keep in mind is because this photo is not perfectly straight on, you are going to have some slight asymmetry likely in whatever photograph you took. And by reflecting, we're going to help account for that. Will it be a perfect engineering drawing of the bottle? Probably not, but you are going to find that you'll be able to get pretty close. Okay, so I'm going to start at the bottom. When something round is sitting on a table, you don't need a ton of visual cues beyond just some slight arcing to make it feel three-dimensional. So I'm going to not be as exaggerated as this arc down here, but I am going to provide some level of arcing. Then I'm going to just kind of follow the contours exactly like I'm seeing them. And you can come back, just like any other work you do with the pen tool, you can come back and edit things, which is great. So one thing I want to point out here is I'm going to show you how to do these embosses. The first line I'm going to put down is just going to be if I imagined the contour of this bottle in its simplest form, which is without an emboss. Okay, and you can also, you have the physical bottle, so one thing I can see on my bottle that I can't see in this photograph is there is a upward angle on this area that I'm on with my pen right now that leads up to the neck of the bottle. And so I'm going to mimic that here, even though I don't see it in real life. And because this is kind of an angle, I'm not going to use my radius tool because it'll just kind of get a little weird. Okay, so once I have that, I want to go down here and I am going to use the radius tool down here. I'm just going to, you can use the direct selection tool, this white arrow here in your tool panel, or you can just press A and it initializes the direct selection tool. I'm going to go ahead and drag this little corner point in and kind of make a radius that just from an eyeballing perspective matches that on my bottle. And then so now I have a pretty good half contour. I'm going to go ahead and wait to reflect it until I also have this emboss work done too. I guess it's more of a deboss. I'm going to actually trace where that deboss starts and then where it finishes, because again, what we're trying to create are the paths that are going to help us the most in Photoshop. And what I'm going to want to eventually do is create tones on these different planes because the light will be acting very differently on them. So that's my goal here. So I'm gonna just kind of come in and trace one of the two lines. I'm picking really just the one that's easiest for me to see in this moment. And that is a little bit wild, so I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of adjust my line work until I feel like I have a contour that closely represents the deboss shape that I'm trying to achieve. All right, so then that's kind of the top contour of that deboss area. I'm going to come down here and do this one, and I'm going to come down here. And this one, again, like it's kind of hard to show from my transparent, slightly transparent photograph, but I have the bottle here and I can look and oops, and that part of the deboss, it just kind of gradually recedes into the bottle form. So I'm going to do that right there. So now I have kind of the beginning of all of the transitions. Oh, one thing you want to make sure anytime you're reflecting something is that in order to get tangencies, see how this curves upward? If I were to reflect it, I'm going to get kind of the top of a heart shape here. So I'm going to go ahead and press Shift C, and that's going to give me the Convert Anchor Point tool. You can also find that under the pen tool at the bottom. And what that's going to allow me to do is take this straight anchor point and give it some curvature handles, curvature controls. And when I pull out, if I hold down Shift, what it gives me are straight curvature controls. And theoretically, if those are straight on both sides, you will achieve some level of tangency to when you reflect. But see, it makes that a little wonky now. So I'm just going to come in and modify this curve control down so that we get a nicer curve up top. And I'll probably come back, revisit this, and refine it even further once I reflect. But for now, that's good enough. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to manually offset this. It's kind of a wonky shape. We'll use the offset tool here shortly, but for now, I'm just going to hold down Alt and drag this down. Okay, so here I want to make sure this is smooth. It won't really matter. I will do a lot of work in Photoshop to make this transition smooth, but it just kind of helps to have things as good as they can be when you start. Okay, so now I feel pretty good about this contour work. I'm going to go ahead and offset this outer path. So I'm going to do an object path, offset path. So I'm going to cancel this for a second and zoom in so that y'all can see a little easier. So object, path, offset path, and see here it's going in a little too far, so I'm going to go ahead and go 2, see what that does. Now it's lining up really well with this edge of the bottle. I'm going to click OK. And then I really only want this internal one, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this path and delete the outer one. Again, maybe there's an easier way to do this. Okay, so now I'm ready to do some path magic. I'm going to select all of these paths, and I'm going to go ahead and use the outline tool, which is in my Pathfinder tool panel, which I pretty much always have open. If you're seeing a line right now, it might be one of the other tabs in that control panel. If not, you can find it under Window, Pathfinder here. I'm going to use the outline because I just want to create all of these paths as one. It'll give me a little more control. It usually gets rid of the appearance of those strokes for some reason when I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have a black stroke on these. Okay, now what my goal here is to get an external contour that matches what I see when I look at the bottle from a front face, which means the fillets that are happening on this deboss transition, I need to make those real deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to delete all of the lines I don't need. So I don't need these external lines because I'm trying to mimic this smooth transition here. And I don't need that line, and I don't need this internal line. So now you can see that what I'm trying to do is follow that contour. When I'm doing this, what I like to do is instead of using the pen tool and connecting these two, I find that inevitably it always connects to the wrong path when I have two endpoints landing on the same in the same location. So I just choose to direct select each of those points. Again, it's the white arrow here, and then just do a Command J, or you can do an Object Path Join. And now I can add an anchor point in the middle, do a convert, and make it curvy. So now I feel like I have a pretty good contour. So now I'm going to select all of my paths. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to do a transform, reflect, vertical axes, and I'm going to press copy. And so now I can drag this over. And okay, so this is like a good example of that asymmetry I was talking about earlier, which is why you want to reflect. I'm getting really good alignment up here with my photograph. Down here, I lose it a little bit, and that's fine. That's natural because, again, your photographs are never actually straight on like you want them to be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to just like kind of eyeball it. I'm looking at the bottle out of the corner of my eye here. I'm looking at how sharp this transition is, and it's actually quite sharp. So I'm going to move that in a little bit. I'm going to start to use kind of this area as my basis, as my foundation for organizing the contours. So I'm going to go ahead and cut both of these so that I have a little bit of space to join them in a smooth transition. I'm actually just going to press my subtract button or use pen delete anchor point tool, and I'm just going to delete, pull that up, put a point there, pull that up, trying to match the red line contour, and then I'm going to convert this so that I can control it individually. And just get, again, like, it's not photorealism, it's trying to get yourself something that'll help you ideate in a way that is representative of the end bottle. And it gives you a lot of freedom. I know it's really easy and popular to just download mock-ups from the internet, but then you are stuck only using the structures that are on the internet. And this really opens you up, allow you to do some cool stuff, or maybe teach you how to do some embossing and debossing to those stock structures as well. Okay, so now we have our contours, and what I just did is I just connected the things that I just bridged the gaps, so to speak. So anything that needed to connect in the middle, I now connected so that everything, including the outer contour, which I connected on the bottom, is now one item. And now I'm going to finish it up with the die line, a neck finish, and a simple cap. So the die line, I'm going to do the same way that I did the outer bottle contour, I'm just going to use my pen tool. I'm going to start down at the bottom this time, and I'm going to trace, do a transform, reflect, copy, boom, here we go. Okay, and then I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to also put a slight arc on the bottom of this just so that it looks like it fits in. I'm just going to, I'm going to start with the cap because I can actually see it. And I'm going to base the height off of this the height of the middlemost point that I'm seeing here. So that's going to be the height. The width, I can go to the ends. And I'm not going to fully embrace this, the arc that I'm getting on the top, because again, that's a perspective thing. But I am going to give it a little bit of an arc. So I'm going to add an anchor point in the middle, do a Shift C to convert that anchor point, hold down Shift so that I get perfectly straight, and then just use my arrow key to like bump it up a couple times. And then I'm looking at my cap. It's hard to see in the photograph, but I see a slight radius on the edges of the cap. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to add a horizontal line. That's going to be my parting line in the cap. And then this shape. And then I'm going to center it on this line. So, if you select two things and then re-click another thing, it'll orient to that thing. I use that all the time because it helps control what I'm centering. And then it's a little bit like an oval rather on the bottom. So I'm just going to select this bottommost point and again use my arrow keys and just give it a few nudges downward. And that's looking pretty good. So now I have my cap. I need to create my neck. And actually, where these terminate is pretty good. I'm going to just take my pen tool and go straight up. On both sides. And then there's this thing called the transfer bead. And we'll talk more about that in later classes. But you want to get that in there because it adds a level of realism. And all that really looks like is just a rectangle across there. I'm looking at this and it almost looks like things are a little off center. So I'm going to select all of these top items because they can all be centered vertically. I'm going to again select what I want them to orient to, which is my bottle form, and I'm going to click center, and now we're all centered. Okay, so now I've got my bottle contour, and I'm ready to go into Photoshop for my rendering. Hold on one second, is this centered? Look at that, how that's much closer to the label than that side is, so it makes me suspicious that the label is not centered, and indeed it was not. Okay, so that's going to be important as we start to import our files into Photoshop. But first, I do need to double check my dimensions. So if you remember at the very beginning, we took dimensions of our bottle so that we could make sure that we got our Illustrator files correct. It's not so important for our Photoshop renderings, but it is important for our die line creation. We want to make sure that we have the right dimensions and the right proportions there. So I'm going to hide my base layer and I'm going to select everything. And if I have my transform panel over here, that's great. Because I've selected so many different paths, I'm going to want to double check that this width and height proportion is correct. And once I do that, the nice thing is I took the width of the base of my bottle and I want to double check that width against the measurement I took, which was 96.06 millimeters. Here I'm reading 144.73. So that's not right, obviously. All I need to do is change that one measurement, and the rest of it, because I built it on top of the photograph, should scale accordingly. So let's give it a shot. 96.06. You can be as accurate as you want. And so now all that happened was everything got a little bit smaller, but proportionately it stayed the same, which is what I wanted. Okay, so now we have our bottle contours, I'm going to now get ready to move into Photoshop. And in order to do that, all I do is I select all my paths like so, and I just do a Command-C. You can also do an Edit, Copy, and now I have them copied to the clipboard.